44 exam questions are on what we're about to cover. This was a 60-page chapter, a lot of reading, a lot of stuff, whole lot of stuff. I mean, if you look at your book, from starting at chapter 5, you're almost halfway through the book as far as bulk. Now, the glossary is in the first half of the book. That's why it took up several pages, but just that. All right. Introduction to planning. Planning domain involves analyzing project needs, determining how business analysis work is to be done. And that ties into one of the homework questions we saw. Planning's about how the business analysis work is to be done and analyzing needs. So business analysis plan comes into play, describes all the business analysis work that is to be performed in the next 3 domains. And of course, again, the domains. We're in planning. We already did needs assessment. Now we're doing planning. So they say in the next domains, so the follow-on domains in the next 3. Allows the business analysis work to progress smoothly and be managed effectively. Business analysis planning is, and a brief description of the need, determine solution alternatives, define scope, plan for developing detailed requirements. And okay, so on page 108, we have an exam tip. And that was weird. I'm gonna get rid of that part. I think I forgot. Oh, that was an accident. There, that's better. All right. The exam tip is toward the top of the page on 108. And it's really nice how they put the exam tips in here like that. It says, when you are answering exam questions, assume proper planning has been done unless stated otherwise. Since business analysis work is complex, involves many people, and is critical to the success of the project, it must be carefully planned and you must follow the plan. So, introduction to planning. Business analysis planning includes getting a more complete understanding of the business area affected, getting more familiar with stakeholders, determining how the project team members will work together, the life cycle approach, setting policies and procedures to manage requirements and solution, or remember, product. Remember, solution means product. Okay, I want you to start using these, and I'll write it in there. It's for synonyms. I want you to start remembering synonyms like that. Solution means product. So the PM and BA do a lot of collaboration. Here's a collaboration point between them. Planning for business analysis work is done in conjunction with project planning. Most of the work on the project is based on stakeholder requirements, where stakeholders have requirements. The business and scope generally means the team's understanding of the stakeholders' requirements. That's really what scope is. It's the expert understanding of what the stakeholder wants. That's what the scope is. The business analysis plan is critical for planning other project work. Successful planning requires collaboration between the PM and the analyst. Boy, is that an important statement. In fact, I'm going to duplicate that and just make that last sentence all, and I'll indent it too, because that's really important. Successful planning requires collaboration between PMs and analysts. Frankly, I would also say functional managers, resource owners, people that the PM or whoever in charge is going to have to get resources from. Scrum Masters can help with getting resources on agile projects. We'll get to that another time, but just planting that seed. When does planning take place? So we already did needs assessment. That was all about project selection and initiating. Now we're looking at planning, project planning, product visioning, and release planning. We'll get into these things. And as we see here, these middle, oh, let me change colors on that. I want a different color pen. So these middle 4 for the analyst are iterative, just like that. So iterations, when you got a replan, it even says iterations or sprints right there, but replanning, reanalyzing, rebuilding, reevaluating. You do what you got to do as changes happen, planned and unplanned. So planning is the second phase in the life cycle after we have first, have assessed the business need and know the business case. And that should have already taken place, right? Needs assessment. So that's what we're really talking about here. So when does planning take place? During planning, list all of the business analysis work for the entire project needed to develop a solution, a product, and bring the business success. Planning. Define acceptance criteria to determine if the solution meets the business needs. Develop a plan to assess the success of the solution after rollout. That is a really important statement. Develop the plan to assess success of the solution after rollout. Remember one of the things that post-implementation, okay, that's important. Assessment, a post-implementation assessment, and we'll see that. That's very important. You got to, and this is the thing, PM might go on with their life. The analyst has to have follow through. You have to. You have to go look at the results. And that's why analytics is so important. You know, it's one thing to say we're going to build, you know, public housing in this area, but that's why the analyst is so important. They'll go back in and see how successful it was or how unsuccessful it was. So we get those variances between planned and actual that become lessons learned on our lessons learned register. Of course, as we all know, regardless of where someone sits, you know, at any level of politics or whatever, that sometimes politicians listen to the analysts, sometimes they don't. I mean, and let me tell you, you need to be able to handle that with thick skin. Because when you are looking at an analysis that says, you know, 88% of the time this way of doing something fails miserably, and then, but this other method, so that's option A, then option B only fails 30% of the time. And you're like, so option B is clearly the better choice. And then the person who like the city council goes with option A because it's better to help them get reelected. You've got to grin and bear it. I'm not asking you to like it, but you need to take that. All you can do is give people the analysis. All you can do is tell them what it means. When a decision is made, you did your job. You did your part. You have to accept when certain decisions are out of your hands, you have to accept it. And that's something that has to be cultivated over time. But you don't want to have like that reaction at the table where you go, good luck with that one, Larry. You know, I mean, you got to just say, well, like I say, that's one of the two options. You know, I mean, something like that. So that's something important to get used to. And I know that you can spend so much time analyzing, you can get really invested in what you did. And it's like, you know how long it took me to get these numbers like this? Yeah, I understand that, but you got to understand, you got to empathize with them too. Build, or excuse me, analysis, elicit the remaining as is and to be requirements. That's a distinction. As is and to be requirements. We're going to discuss that. Build, support the solution team as they build the solution. Solution evaluation, work with testers and quality assurance analysts to ensure the solution meets business needs. And then solution development deployment is our last domain. Assess the success of the solution after rollout. So, and obviously as is requirement means keep it. To be is not yet the way it will be. One is current, one is future. Well, we'll get more into that later. Things to know about planning for the exam. Business analysts are, and then I know we're already, I'll put you on your break here in a minute. Business analysts are responsible for working with the PM to plan business analysis work. You hear that? It's not supposed to be for the PM to come find you. The analyst is responsible for working with the PM. They're supposed to find the PM that they're helping. They're supposed to proactively engage the PM. Just saying, to plan business analysis work, because you're the guiding light. Business analysis plans become part of the overall project management plan, which is a big 18 component set of documents for a project. It has everything: the work schedule, the budget, the everything, including the stuff you're going to use. Communication planning is coordinated with the PM to ensure stakeholders receive consistent messages. I cannot begin to tell you how often that gets overlooked. Folks, you've got to make sure that stakeholders get consistent messages from you and the PM. Consistent. You can't, it's easy to miscommunicate something. That's why language is so important. You have to work in tandem with each other because it's very easy to confuse people, and some people don't react well to confusion. And I could just to give you an idea. So when I was doing this contract with somebody, I was the subcontractor, okay, and we're going to go to Dubai for this training that I'm going to teach a few years ago. And obviously, my passport was literally like expiring the day before we're supposed to leave. So I had to go get my passport, or maybe it had expired or whatever. I think it just had, and so I had to get it all redone. I admit there's an expediting service you can do. It literally has, like, once you get all the paperwork stuff in order, it's like a 48-hour turnaround because you're paying extra for the State Department to push it through. They still follow the process. It just puts you at the top of the list. And I paid the extra to do it. It was 10 days before we were going to leave. And I said, I'll have my passport back within 48 hours renewed. When the client saw that, I should have thought before I replied all. I should have just replied to the contractor I was working under. I didn't think, because it's a 48-hour turnaround. And I had that email that it said, you'll have this within 48 hours. Didn't matter. When I told them, and this was all set in stone, that I'm the instructor, I'm leaving in 10 days, I'm teaching this class, and my passport was now being updated. I didn't have it in my hand. The guy who was working with the Saudis, we taught Saudis, but the class was in Dubai, United Arab Emirates. Amazing place to visit, beautiful architecture, very Western. And the guy started freaking out. He literally said, like, I'm almost having a panic attack right now. And that's all he said. And he replied. I was like, oh. As soon as I got that in my hand, I took a picture of it and a close up on the expiration. It's good for another 10 years, you know. When I got my passport, I emailed it to them immediately so they could see it. But stuff like that, you got to plan communications, man. You got to plan that. Business analysts spend much of their planning time talking with stakeholders. And yeah, the other lesson, Sean needs to try to not be an idiot. I get it. To determine how to best work with them. Stakeholder analysis. Not all analysts really appreciate that they're supposed to be doing stakeholder analysis. At any given time, the analyst should know exactly what every stakeholder has on their mind in terms of that project. They really should. Always plan. It's not just doing the business case and that stuff. That's one of 6 phases, or excuse me, one of 6 domains. That's one of 6. Okay. Always plan, even for small assignments, but you don't always have to document them. All right, maybe it wasn't, but you can imagine what it'd be like if it was. So let's see. Now we just finished on this one. Always plan, even for small assignments, but you don't always have to document the plan. That is the last one we did. All right. Things to know about planning for the exam. Continued. When you are the project manager and the business analyst, you develop both the project and business analysis work. The exam is only asking about the business analysis work. This exam is only asking about business analysis work. So that is worthy of pointing out. You plan at the beginning of each assignment, but replanning is needed when a project's assigned. At the beginning of each project assignment, but replanning is needed. Remember we talked about back here, iterations or sprints, replanning, reanalyze, rebuild, etc. Replanning is needed when circumstances change or you learn more about what is needed. When answering questions about the other domains, questions assume your work has already been planned and you always follow the plan. That is an exam tip, to be quite frank with you. So that is worthy of remembrance. When answering questions about the other domains, questions assume your work has already been planned and you always follow the plan. So please remember that. Plans that include business analysis work are the business analysis plan, business analysis work plan. I mean, one's the broader plan, and one's just about the work that'll be done on the project or on the analysis, excuse me. Scope management plan, communications management plan. My PMPs will recognize some of this. Elicitation plan, that's strictly for analysts. Stakeholder management plan, requirements management plan, quality management plan, change management plan, and document management plan. Why don't we just simplify this real quick, by the way? Instead of management plan, why don't we use different words for that? Why don't we change management plan to company policy? How about that? That's basically what it is. Management plan equals company policy. That's it. So there's another way to put it too. It can also be called best practices. So you can consider it that way too. Best practices or company policy. Just like that. So say that in that way. Scope company policy. Communications company policy. Stakeholder company policy. Requirements policy. Quality policy. Company policy. A quality policy by itself is for the project. It just says what that project's quality level is expected to be. The company might have a 3 Sigma standard, but that project could have a 6 Sigma standard. Meaning, and we'll cover that, but meaning a higher level of efficiency is required. Acceptance criteria for the solution is important for planning. Otherwise, you won't know what questions to ask during elicitation. So acceptance criteria is an integral part of elicitation. So who is involved in planning anyway? Now, let's first note, business analysts like project managers ask team members to help develop time and cost estimates to increase plan accuracy. You know, it's not the one thing. It's not just the analyst. Like you get PMs that you're working with, and you all should be talking to team members, experts. Who all can be involved then that you're talking to when you're planning? The requester, the sponsor or product owner, end users, tester, business subject matter experts, the technical architect, or the entire solution team. You might think of a technical architect kind of as like a team lead, if you will, person who sort of is putting that stuff together for the team from a technical perspective. So the lead developer, tech architect is what they're usually called though. A regulator for compliance, and the project manager, as we said. A lot of people involved in planning. It shouldn't be you by yourself burning the midnight oil. I mean, you can learn a great deal from historical documents and your own experience. Yeah, that's fine, but don't discount the value of these other people, these other stakeholders. And to put it very bluntly, I approach everyone, I mean in business and in general, I approach everyone like there's something valuable to learn from them. And if I want to learn it, I need to sharpen my people skills in order to get that from them. So, and it causes you to, and I always try to treat people like they are sincere. When someone says, yeah, I can't get this to work, I take that sincerely. And then I say, okay, well, let's address it. Even if they might sound like it's a little sarcastic or something. Sometimes I sound sarcastic or even kind of overbearing, and I don't realize it. And sometimes I'll pull people aside whose judgment I value and trust, and I'll say, did that sound? Or sometimes I'll just say it bluntly, and I'll look at them and say, did I just sound overbearing? And they'll be like, yeah, a little bit, but I don't think it's anything to worry about. And I was like, oh. So, we're always trying, and people skills is something everyone can get better at. That's the good thing about it. I am and I'm not alone in this, especially when it comes to analysts. I am a very introverted person. I extrovert myself, which studies show that a high degree of introvertedness or introversy, I think it's introverted is the correct way to say it, but a high degree of being an introvert, it also, studies show couples with being neurotic, which could also mean somewhat negative. But yeah, whatever. Little nutso is how I'd probably say it for myself. Everyone else is fine. But I'll just look at people and ask. I'll be like, oh, did that sound overbearing? What could I have said better about that? If I didn't get the reaction I wanted, I asked someone else. How should I have said that? Everyone can teach you. But if you approach everyone like they are sincere, you'll never fail to give people the respect they feel they deserve if they're reasonable about it. Business analysis, responsibilities, and planning. Assess the complexity of the project, solution type, and development approach. Decide how formal your business analysis planning needs to be and which plans will be developed. Basically, you don't want to be more formal than necessary. Determine the business analysis work that will be necessary to meet the business need. Find out what templates, standards, and tools are available for use on that assignment. And identify all the stakeholders who will impact or be impacted by the solution/product. Continued responsibilities for the BA, business analyst, in planning. Work with the project manager to facilitate agreement on each stakeholder's role and responsibilities on the project. Assess each stakeholder or stakeholder group or groups for their interests, influence, and attitude about the solution. Determine which elicitation techniques will be used with each stakeholder group. Develop a general plan for the logistics for elicitation sessions, locations, budgets, attendees, so the stakeholder can plan their schedule. And that's really important. That doesn't happen a lot. A general plan for logistics of elicitation sessions. How you're going to get people's requirements, elicit requirements with acceptance criteria. Cannot begin to tell you how important, if you're going to get requirements, you need to get their acceptance criteria. I don't care what your role is. Someone tells you, oh, I need the following, and you can use Moscow to prioritize. Well, is that a must have, should have, could have, or would like? And then you can just do a scale and say, if it's a number 4, if it's incredibly important, and it needs immediate attention. It's a number 3 if it needs to happen, just not right now, but it's a need. It's a 2, like Moscow. Must have, should have, could have, would like. Well, must have would be like a 4. Should have would be a 3. Could have would be a 2. Would like will be a 1. You can just tell them a 1 to 4, and then you organize it using Moscow. But again, when you get requirements, use Moscow to prioritize. Determine what business analysis deliverables will be produced. Determine how requirements will be documented. Whiteboard, word processor of some kind, a spreadsheet, requirements management tool. Requirements traceability matrix is awesome. Design the requirements management process and traceability strategy. A lot of this exam focuses on traceability. Oh my gosh. Hopefully you're listening to the audio. Guys, let me just, here, I'll come back to that point. Look, as you know on your drive here, you have audio, hot topics, right there, that folder. Listen to this stuff. And there's a folder within that folder for the same things as MP3s. And I broke it up by section. Listen to these things. Download it onto your device. Listen to it. I used to listen to this stuff while I was showering, driving somewhere to and from, in between business calls if I'm driving. I mean, constant, doing something mindless like doing the dishes at night, whatever. Listen to these on your lunch break. I'd listen to it whenever I could during breakfast. I'm not joking. Right before I went to bed, I'd listen, think, and then like read some stuff about it, which would put me right to sleep. But I'm telling you, those audios are great. Use them. Develop a complete business analysis plan. Oh, I was up here. I'm sorry. Design the requirements management process and traceability strategy, and determine which requirements, attributes, and states will be tracked. Estimate the time required to perform each business analysis task. Develop a complete business analysis plan. Provide it to the PM to be incorporated into their bigger project management plan. So let's look at responsibilities and planning. The project manager by themselves, guys, this slide's very important. You need to remember this because you'll get a couple of questions where you have to differentiate or the things that both parties have to do, the PM and BA have to do. You're going to have to remember these. You will get a couple of questions on this. What is the project manager alone responsible for in the planning domain? The PM will have to plan the business analysis work in addition to overseeing the planning for the entire project. The PM may ask for a senior business analyst from within the organization to help with business analysis planning. The analyst, the BA will have to develop the business analysis plan along with overseeing development of the PM plan, relying on other team members to plan each of their areas respectively. The analyst may ask a PM from within the organization to review the plans before finalizing. See how one goes to the other when they're working together. The BA will plan, so this is when there's just a PM and no analyst. This is when there's an analyst, no PM. This is when you have both working together. The BA will plan the business analysis work while the PM oversees development of the entire project management plan. They should work closely together to avoid redundant or inconsistent planning of communications, scope management, change management, and requirements management. The PM ultimately prepares the project management plan, which includes business analysis plan. So the analyst does the business analysis plan. The PM plans the business analysis work, in addition to overseeing the entire project. So this is when a PM's doing it and might need to go to an analyst. When an analyst is doing it, might need to go to the PM. This is when they're both working side by side. You can get a scenario on each of these, the two respectively, individually, or when they're together. And that brings us to an exam tip on page 115. Let's turn there and take a look. Top of the page, it says, most exam questions will assume there are both a project manager and a business analyst assigned to the project. Therefore, you will have to understand the roles of each in the given situations. Be sure to answer from the perspective of the analyst. My PMPs are going to have that issue for a little while they're practicing on these practice questions, and that's okay. But that's why practice questions are priceless. So what's the assumption? Most exam questions will assume there are both a PM and analyst assigned to your project. Now, let's take a look at what planning is. So develop the business analysis plan. Understand the project lifecycle approach, understand the solution context, identify and analyze stakeholders, define acceptance criteria for the solution. The above work is usually done concurrently and iteratively until a strong plan is created. So in tandem, these can be done. Let's start, well, we're going to split them up. Let's start about understand the project lifecycle approach. Remember these words, predictive lifecycle approach is plan driven. What is predictive? Waterfall or traditional projects are predictive. Adaptive life cycle approaches are change driven. They're talking about the work. In a predictive project, the work is well planned out. Adaptive, the work is change driven. And I'm going to put that after each other. The work, because that's worthy of remembering. Iterative life cycle approaches, improving completed work. Incremental life cycle approaches, design and build in small pieces. You need to remember those. Why? You could get an example on the exam that says you are starting planning and your project life cycle approach. The experts have told you this will be delivered with small pieces being released at a time, each at a different time. What life cycle approach should you take when planning business analysis work? Incremental. It's small pieces, small increments. If you're going to improve something that already exists, that's an iterative life cycle. If the work is simply going to be changing a lot, that's adaptive. If the work needs to be planned out well in advance, that's predictive life cycle. You have to be able to choose out of these four. Remember, your exam will be answers A, B, C, D. These are four things. It's easy to make a question out of four things. They'll put three of them in there and say which one is not a life cycle approach. It'll just say predictive, incremental, adaptive, reactive. There's no such thing as reactive. That's a joke that a lot of us tell. Oh, predictive? Yeah. That's a reactive approach. No, it's a predictive approach. Reactive is a joke. There's no reactive kind. Reactive is, and I'm not joking, I'm talking like law enforcement. That's reactive. There's no anticipation. You cannot anticipate a crime. You react to it. Okay. Understand the project life cycle approach. It's important to differentiate, especially predictive versus adaptive projects. Adaptive or agile prefers complex projects. Remember, that means complex work. The work changes a lot. Projects with lots of changes, work changes a lot, while cost and schedule does not. Predictive, also called waterfall or conventional projects, prefers few change processes used. Costs/schedules change a lot, while scope does not. Now, do you all remember the difference for these? With adaptive, schedule and costs are locked in. Work changes a lot. With predictive, work is locked in. Costs and schedules change a lot. You got to remember those. Understanding the approach from a collaboration standpoint for the PM and analyst, always discuss the life cycle approach with the PM before you start planning. Lessons learned and retrospectives. Lessons learned, my agile people know that one right off. Lessons learned should be documented as they are discovered. And at the end of the project, milestone or initiative. Make part of the organization process assets, OPAs, and be available for future teams. Organizational assets would be like lessons learned. That's an asset that we could use. Retrospectives, what are they? Team sessions to look back at how well the team worked together and how the product development process went. Adaptive project teams conduct these at the end of every iteration for continuous improvement. Iterative versus incremental life cycle approaches. Iterative approach refers to work that's already been done and now needs to be improved or revised, rework, if you will. Incremental approach refers to work that you design and build in small pieces until you've created the ultimate solution. We have an exam tip on page 118. We turn to 118. In the middle of the page, our exam tip, and it says, if you don't have software development experience, try to learn as much as you can about how software is designed and developed. Many exam questions describe software development projects. Think about a software application you use, online banking, e-commerce, and how you have, go to webinar in this case, how you have seen it change over time. Okay, if you haven't used it before, maybe not. Think of a search page, or yeah, like a banking page, and how you have seen it change over time. Were the changes major, well-planned releases, probably predictive, or small, evolving enhancements, probably adaptive? Online banking has become huge. I remember it was a big deal, advertised all the time, when you could deposit a check using your phone. Are you kidding me? Unbelievable. They would be like, and now just take a picture and that's it. And it uses recognition for the check. It reads the check number because that's always in a professional font. It's terrific. It's terrific. And then what did they do? You could redeem your points for a credit card linked to that account online. You could look at your insurance, renew your insurance, all kinds of stuff. Make transfers, transfer money into someone else's account. How to take without their permission, how to take money out without their permission. I'm still figuring that one out. But how to put money, you can put money as long as you got their account number. So you can. I mean, why wire money? If you need to pay someone, just have them give you their account info. I mean, if you're a company, you got to sign a document that says it's just for payment. But you can just transfer the money. It's free. When people wire it, I mean, I get it. They want more traceability, maybe, and it's quicker. Transferring over days, it could take a few days because a wire is instant. But that's a good tip. So that's understand project life cycle approach. There were 4 life cycles: predictive, adaptive, iterative, and incremental. Understand the solution context. Review the business case and project objectives. Approve solution scope and context. Context diagram with a list of interfaces. Use case diagram. And a solution scope baseline. Remember, solution means product. Baselining in the generic development lifecycle. When planning, we baseline the solution scope. Analysis, baseline to be requirements that make up the solution design. So what's the collaboration between the PM and the analyst? Product scope can be baselined at any time and adjusted as needed during the project. Decide early when to do it. Solution scope baseline. Solution scope and context should be captured in a solution scope document. Again, they could call it a product scope document, and that's technically acceptable. Product scope must be approved by the sponsor or product owner. Please write that down. Solution scope must be approved by the sponsor or product owner. They're one and the same. A project either has a product owner or a sponsor. Please remember that. You'll get a couple questions about that. Analyst has finished writing out the solution scope. They are now going to take it to the project manager to incorporate into the project plan. What has the analyst failed to do at this point? Answer, they did not take it to the sponsor / product owner for approval. It's a baseline. Baselines must have sponsor / product owner approval. So when do you baseline anything? Think about that point, because that's going to be 2 to 4 questions on the exam, I promise you. The when is important. You baseline after approval by appropriate stakeholders, like we've said. Solution scope is baselined after the approval by the sponsor, PM, technical architect, and any other key stakeholders. Please remember that. A baseline means a plan that's frozen. It's frozen, it's locked in, this is the plan. So obviously before it's frozen, and once something's called a baseline, that means it has been frozen. That means it has been approved. So if you see an example on the exam where it says you already have a baseline, unless the scenario says otherwise, you are to assume that if it's already a baseline, it was already approved by these people. That is important to keep in mind. It's not just what is going on in the scenario, it's where and when is something going on. Those are just as important. So what are synonyms? Well, an important point, to be requirements can also be called future state requirements or solution design requirements. Please write that down. Those are important synonyms. Please go ahead and write that by hand. So now we identify and analyze stakeholders. Conducting stakeholder analysis, getting to know the people on your team. Stakeholder identification, make a list of those impacted. Stakeholder list or register, details important info about your stakeholders. And then organizational modeling, a collection of diagrams, descriptions, and characteristics. On page 126, we have another exam tip, and a little lengthy, but no less, it's a tip, and these are valuable. There will be several questions about stakeholder analysis on the exam. Although the questions won't always use the term stakeholder analysis, any questions about communication, elicitation of requirements, or working with your team, a team of experts, will assume you have performed stakeholder analysis. This means you've gotten to know as much about your stakeholders as possible and have thought about how to best work with them. When you answer questions about stakeholder relationships, remember that successful business analysis involves developing honest, trusting relationships with all of your stakeholders. The more you trust each other, the better your work will be. The more you know about the people you are working with, the more effective you will be. They give you an example of a stakeholder register on the next page, on page 127. You see the people's name, their title, the department they're in, contact info, and then their role. You see, the title that someone carries is not the same as the role they play on your project. Someone may be the chief information officer, and in the real world, don't get too cozy, too cozy with the chief information officer. That is the quickest turnaround chief position in business. The longest they tend to stay in that position is 3 years. It's just a musical chair. It's just constantly, and a lot of them are big, experienced IT people who take that chief job to get to the next rung. They may or may not particularly like that because they've been more of an expert for a long time. Now they're a big manager, a chief, in fact. They may not like it as much, so they may, first chance they get to get something that pays better, they may get out of that so they can check that box for their career. So it's a very musical chair. It's a revolving door position. Those people get replaced often. CFOs, the chief finance officer, they stay around longer. CEOs, they tend to stay around longer. CIO, you know, if they're the one who's always going to bat for you, they're not going to be in that position that long, folks. Statistically, not saying there aren't some that don't do that for 10 or 12 years. There are some, but statistically, it's 1 to 3 years. It's the fastest rotating chief position in a company. And the role that that person plays in your project, they might be a resource owner for your project, but that's the chief information officer for the company. So their title versus the role in your project, the title for the company they have, but the role on your project is not the same necessarily. In fact, it's usually very different. So this is an example of a stakeholder register. Person's name, the role they play in the project, department they're in, company designation, that means their title. Requirements, and then I don't put any there. Why not? Because that's in your requirements traceability matrix. Responsibilities, why didn't I put that there? Because that's in your RACI chart, which we'll talk about later, a type of responsibility assignment matrix. See, people will look at the wrong tool for a certain type of information. So anticipating that, I give them a quick hyperlink. When people ask me for information, by the way, something that they could have just found themselves on a document, I don't give them the answer. I give them the link to that document. I might tell them the item ID number, which would be like over here, number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you know, just give it an ID number. And that way, because I really believe we teach people how to treat us. If you just give people the answer, next time they have a question, they're just going to ask you for the answer. If you show them where to find it, they're much more likely to do it that way next time because they know I'm just going to send them that link anyway, and they're still going to have to look it up themselves. But we're going to see things about stakeholder. You got a stakeholder quadrant, salient score. This is just the kind of stuff you'd have on your register. Now, a register means it's a prioritized list, most important at the top. So for all the stakeholders identified thus far, I'm the most important one. Larry is right beneath me as a functional manager, and then less important, less important, less important. Register means most important at the top. Lessons learned, register. Most important lesson learned at the top. Risk register, most important risk at the top. Stakeholder register, most important stakeholder at the top. This is all about stakeholders. It has nothing to do with work or requirements. So we have something called a stakeholder grid analysis, or SGA. And it has 4 strategies. Strategy 1, 2, 3, 4. In fact, if you drew the letter N capitalized backwards, that's the shape it makes. So strategy 1 are the most important people. Strategy 2 are one notch beneath that. Strategy 3, and then finally strategy 4, the least important stakeholders. But what do we call them? And you need to know this. You need to know what I'm about to show you. On a grid analysis, strategy 1 means what? Manage closely. You don't need to remember the name up here, promoters. That's not necessarily. Well, they could put it on there, but usually they just put the term manage closely. So strategy 1, people, you manage closely. Strategy 2, keep informed. You need to remember strategy 1 means manage closely. They might not even say strategy 1. They might say the following stakeholder needs to be kept satisfied. Where would you put them on a grid analysis? The answer would be strategy 3. Or they could ask it as, would you put a person that needs to be satisfied, that needs to be kept satisfied, more important than people that you manage closely? Less important than keep informed? Less important than monitor? More important than keep informed? So you see what I'm saying? So the answer would be less important. Strategy 3, keep satisfied, is less important than a strategy 2 person, keep informed. But that's how they could try to word it. So remember the strategy number with each term, and it'll be easier because you'll just be like, well, number 1's the most important, then 2, then 3, then 4. So you can literally just number it up and then look at it. Makes it easier. But you need to be able to do this. You'll get a couple of questions, at least a couple of questions on this. You need to remember it, folks. Let's say Larry has a high amount of power, which is influence, but a fairly low impact on our project. Now remember, this is power and interest, or the way we could say it is that interest / impact, influence / power. And you could switch the X and Y axis. It doesn't matter. It puts them in the same place. High is still the same corner. It puts them in the same basic place. And so if we say Larry is a strategy 2 person, and I'm a strategy 1, he'd be beneath me. But we have other, it's a stakeholder register that we're making and updating here. Okay, we're going to make this and update it. So I've identified Larry as a stakeholder. I say Larry is a strategy 2 person. I'm a strategy 1, he's a strategy 2. And then I do that for other people as well. But that's not enough. I need other ways to reprioritize them. I need more factors to figure out their importance. So let me make the full slide here. I can then use the salience model. Salience model uses these 3 things: power, urgency, legitimacy. Or look at that, P-U-L, pull. Salience measures how much pull, power, urgency, legitimacy, pull a person has. If they have it, they get a score of 1. If they don't, they get a 0. Add them up going left to right. Someone that gets a score of 3 is the most important, are the most important people. 2s, 1s, 0s. So after I do a stakeholder grid analysis and organize and prioritize my stakeholder register, I then give everyone a salience score. Power basically means prominence. Urgency means if they need something, it's important. Legitimacy is noticeability. It's another way of looking at it. And it helps you reprioritize. So let's say Larry and I are both salience score of 3, aren't we? So we'll have to keep that in mind. Then we have a directions of influence diagram. And what it's basically saying here is on your stakeholder register, you can write down who these people can influence. A stakeholder register, we're going to update it with the directions of influence diagram. You see how I did that? And the arrow means they can influence people above them. And I put letters and numbers in there, stakeholder ID numbers. So I can, if I can look down this list and go, I need someone who can influence Larry. So in my story, Garland, I looked at him one day at lunch at the cafeteria and I was like, this is the guy. I can go to Garland and tell him I'm having issues with Richard, and I bet he'll help me because Garland's terrific. I talked to Garland after lunch, after he and Richard went their separate ways. Garland said, call me at a certain time today. I said, okay. When I called him, he said, I talked to Richard, I took care of it. He's working on it all now. Don't talk to him or anything else. He will email you everything before COB today, before close of business today. I said, perfect. I left Richard alone, didn't say anything. And I'm telling you, right at 5 p.m., I got that email from him. It had everything. everything I needed. And it worked. So I realized, wow, this is really the way to get things done sometimes, because this is really effective. So the way a directions of influence diagram works is you write the person's name down and then who they can affect, whether it's someone above them, below them, left, right, or that you tell this person and they hang out at that water cooler and they tell everybody else. It's kind of an outward, like they're on a soapbox. You tell them and they'll tell everybody. It could be all. It could also be positional. Either the CIO, so everybody gets an email blast, sort of thing, and then you update that. So that way, if I go, I need someone who can affect Larry. A2. I go to the find function, type in A2, and look at that. I put A2 over here, didn't I? So then I can look and see who is that. That person can influence Larry, and Larry is, and this person can affect A2, who is above him. Got it. So that's how you can use it right there. Great, great tool. Then you have a stakeholder cube. What is a stakeholder cube? A stakeholder cube is new for this exam and other PMI exams, but it's a cube. Cubes have 3 dimensions. All right, and the 3 dimensions are, I call it PIA, P-I-A, power, interest. Look at that, attitude. You take into consideration the person's attitude. How wicked is that? Such a great tool. Look at how awesome that is. So you need to know this stuff for the exam. And look at all these possibilities. Insignificant passive backer, influential active backer, meaning a backer of your project. So that means these people are either passive or active, influential or insignificant, and a backer or a blocker. Go through each person and decide, and then update that risk register. Influential active backer. And who can they influence? It tells me right there. And they're prioritized by importance on my project. Do you see how useful this is? It's incredibly useful. What a great tool. Stakeholder register, and people that don't have them, that means they're trying to do it all in their head. You're going to miss something. You got to organize it on this. And by the way, I will be very frank with you. I password protect this. I got my register that I use, and then I got one I publish for everybody else, which is more basic. People don't need to see who I believe influences who. They don't need to see how I stakeholder cube them, put them as an insignificant passive blocker, you know? I mean, that doesn't sound nice. I mean, you don't want people necessarily see that. They see they're way down low on the register. They're like, does that mean I'm not important? I got a low salient score. I'm in the weak part of the quadrant. Well, but this is the thing. I'm not talking about them to the organization. It's just them to my project. The analyst needs to do this stuff. In the absence of an analyst, a PM would do it. All right, I've gone farther. So actually, hold on. We'll go up to this exercise so we can make that part of the break. Okay, a couple more slides real quick. A responsibility assignment matrix, or RAM, is a way of showing which positions will be responsible for project deliverables. Positions are represented in columns and work packages are shown in rows. It's an organizational breakdown structure by roles and then by work packages, meaning work activities where experts will do work. It shows you who's responsible for any of them. This one might be for the project charter getting signed. This one is for the business analysis plan being done. That's on the analyst, etc. Then we have something called a RACI matrix or RACI chart. What does it do? It documents which stakeholders will do what work and is used throughout the project to keep track of the responsibilities of those stakeholders. RACI stands for responsible, accountable, consulted, informed. Responsible, the person who creates the requirements documents, design plans, and test cases. Accountable, the person with approval authority and ultimately will be evaluated on the success or failure of the project. I also call the person accountable. That A, to me, also stands for answerable. They are answerable for that work package, for that work. They may not be responsible to do the work, but they're answerable to senior management for it. You always got to have someone listed as the accountable party. Consulted, the people who would be included in gathering requirements and solution design. Informed, the person who will be given info about this stuff. These are FYI people. Informed people are what you might call FYI people. No response needed. They're just FYI. And this is an example of a RAM turned into a RACI chart. Here's a RACI chart or matrix. It's a type of responsibility assignment matrix. But again, it takes it a step further. And it says, hey man, and let me just show you guys something here. For approved scope, that's a work package. Get the work approved. Scope is work. Get the work approved. Approved scope. The PM, in this case, on this project's accountable for that. You got lots of people who are responsible to do the work involved, but who answers to senior management? The person with the A, that's accountable. What about design application? Who answers for that? This person here, application architect for this one. You can have lots of kept informed, lots of consulted, lots of responsibles, but there's only ever one accountable person per work package. Only one is answerable for any work package. See, the reason I'm going out of my way to explain that in a little more detail is that a lot of people think that responsible means, well, you're responsible to answer for it. No, you're responsible to do work on it. Consultants tell you what they think about it. Responsible people do the work on it. I is for FYI people, no response back from them is ever needed. A is for who answers for it all. Stakeholder analysis. Understand stakeholders. Look at their backgrounds, beliefs, and behaviors to determine how best to work with them. Cultural differences, political awareness, and stakeholder characteristics. Now we got to define what that is. Culture are the beliefs and behaviors of a particular group of people. Politics is the theory and practice of influencing others. So that's what you should take them to mean. And whether we want to or not, people influence people. You know, when someone says, oh, I'm not sure I want to work there, I hear there's a lot of office politics. Well, there's politics anywhere because it's just influence. Whether someone is openly influential or quietly influential, you know, actions speak louder than words. Someone doesn't show up to 3 of your meetings in a row. You know, it could start to be a sign that, well, that can influence others who are like, well, maybe they see something I don't. There's not a lot of value to come into these meetings. So that's why it's political awareness, the awareness of the theory and practice of influencing others. And then that's understanding stakeholders. And then there's job analysis. Learn about their job and responsibilities. Preferred communication protocols, preferred requirements, presentation formats. All right, define acceptance criteria for the solution. That's our next step for developing the business analysis plan. We've understood the project life cycle. There were 4 different ones. As we saw predictive, adaptive, iterative, and incremental. And then we understand the solution context. Then we identify and analyze stakeholders. Now we have to define acceptance criteria for the product. When it comes to defining the steps for acceptance criteria, we have to decide which criteria to use. It ought to have broad consensus, broad buy-in from people. You know, Dr. King once said, leaders don't seek consensus, leaders build consensus. Right. I mean, it's such a great statement, and he's absolutely right. Capture the current state metrics if possible, and decide on the desired future state metrics, meaning acceptance criteria. So future state metrics are your acceptance criteria. We have an exam tip on page 135 at the bottom of the page, and it says exam questions may not specifically refer to an external customer, but if the situation involves a contract, you can assume the customer is outside of your organization. Now that plays on the first tip we covered this evening or today, that basically said, well, it was one of the practice questions from the homework that we had discussed. And it said an external customer, external stakeholder should have a contract. So like this says, exam questions may not specifically refer to an external customer, but if the situation involves a contract, you should assume that it is someone outside your organization. Just a point of fact, larger companies for resource allocation traceability, larger companies may require intra-contracting. Meaning if you want someone from our finance department, you have to do a formal contract system contract with their boss to get them. And places like USAA, they are okay with you bringing a project in under budget, but they don't want you to finish ahead of schedule. Why? Because that means that you got to find something else for those people to do, and that throws off resource allocation traceability. And that can make it difficult. Yeah, a memorandum of understanding, right? An MOU, yeah, exactly. But just for traceability of these things, really is important. So let's define acceptance criteria for the product, for the solution. So what's acceptance criteria? Remember, it should be tied to SMART objectives for the solution. And do you remember specific, measurable? Oh, geez, now I got to try to remember this out of the top of my head. Why do I always get stuck? It'll come to me. Just give me a second. Good. Is it achievable? Achievable. I know it's relevant and time boxed. It doesn't say time boxed. It says time bounded, I think. But it's I don't know. I never remember that one exactly. But a specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bounded. I think that's right. That sounds right. But that's SMART. You need to remember that for the exam, folks. I am telling you, you're going to get several questions. SMART is about objectives. You remember that? It's used to evaluate project objectives or smaller business objectives, or excuse me, bigger business objectives. SMART evaluates objectives. Acceptance criteria are defined at a more detailed level in the analysis phase to help with testing planning. Try to identify at least one useful metric for each project. It's a better evaluation of success and a clear conclusion in the testing of pass-fail criteria. Testing plans, therefore, planned and ideally done by a testing expert, evaluates the solution by comparing it to the original project objectives, requirements, and acceptance criteria. Assesses the quality and applicability of the solution because the tester didn't write the requirements or build the solution. Planning for solution evaluation and deployment. Even if you have, even if you have a testing expert, business analysis work always involves some of the solution evaluation work. So solution evaluation work will always involve business analysis. Planning for user acceptance testing, that's an important term. UAT, user acceptance testing, make a note of that. It should have been in your glossary too. Let me flip back to, why didn't I look up the glossary for SMART? You know what, I'll do it while I'm there. Hey, you like this? Oh, for crying out loud. It's toward the beginning of the book. And, oh, okay, like 50, page 50 or something. User acceptance testing should be one of the, yeah, you on page 53 toward the top, fourth one down, user acceptance testing. Validation or evaluation testing executed by knowledgeable users prior to implementation to ensure expected business value will be realized. The sooner you memorize this glossary, the quicker you will catch on to everything else. I promise you. Memorize it, learn it. It's the language of analysts and business. User acceptance testing, typically the last phase of software testing, intended to ensure the product complies with business requirements and may involve a trial run. Meaning it might not be just a quick test, you might have to do a periodic trial with a set start and finish date. Planning or some other mechanism of finish when it's completely run. Planning for post-implementation assessment. Remember, that's an important required part of being an analyst, post-implementation assessment. We can't really know a solution brings value to the organization until it's been in use a while. Now, there are different ways that things are valued. Profit is not the only one. Benefit, value, profit, these things are basically synonyms, but it's not always money. Include a plan for evaluating the product after it's been used in the business environment to see if it is meeting the original objectives. Finally, it's about develop the business analysis plan. It's included in the overall 18-component project management plan. So the project manager is accountable for all of this to exist, but the business analysis plan, although it's not here, this is from the project manager's perspective, it should be within it. So as you see management plan here, just remember best practices or company policy is what that means. It'll help it make more sense to you. Okay, so stakeholder is what? Any entity that can change, /alter, /affect your project in any way or perceive being affected by it. This is the company's policy or best practices on how to handle stakeholders, how to prioritize them, how to do all the stuff with them that we've discussed. So think of management plan as being best practices or company policy, and whatever you're looking at on page 140, whether it's requirements management plan, quality management plan, change management plan, just say it's the company policy of how we handle blank. And that is one way to look at it to help you out. So if you think of it like that, it will make a lot more sense. So project plan names and components, as we've shown you. Predictive life cycles will have more formal planning focused on the 10 knowledge areas in the PMBOK. And that's basically that picture we showed you. Adaptive life cycles will use names like product roadmap, release planning, and iteration planning. Business analyst tailors the business analysis plan as requested by the PM. Be careful not to duplicate effort. You should know the following business analysis components. Business analysis plan or work plan, those are synonyms. Scope management plan, communications management plan, all the rest of these management plans. Stakeholder requirements, quality, change, document management plan. So the scope management plan, we'll discuss each of these here. Format of the scope statement or diagrams to be used. Description of the scope baselining procedure, list of interfaces and their expected changes, change management process for requested scope changes, communications management plan, list of stakeholders and their contact info, stakeholders' communication preferences, plan frequency of communications, elicitation plans, and scheduled dates, requirements review and a walkthrough schedule, and then group decision making, how stakeholders will make decisions about the solution design. In our communications plan, this is just an example of what one can look like. Pretty rudimentary, pretty straightforward. The person, their title, that's his role title. I don't like the way that reads. Frequency, format channel, and any particular notes about communicating with them as well. So page 142, we have an exam tip at close to the top of the page, top half of the page it's in. If your organization has standard templates or formats for plans or requirements, you should use them. PMI refers to these as organizational process assets, or OPAs. Follow your company's procedures and make recommendations to change them when you see areas of improvement. And then in a sentence beneath that tip, an experienced analyst should be able to develop business analysis plans without the help of a PM. This frees up the time of the PM to plan the rest of the project. That's someone that does business analysis day in, day out. And honestly, if there's no PMs you can bother, ask another analyst. And first thing, just ask them for is copies of templates. So a stakeholder management plan, the explanation of how stakeholders will be identified, description of how and when stakeholders will be involved, stakeholder communication preferences, description of how stakeholder engagement and expectations will be managed, and then a quality management plan. You have to understand what quality means, by the way. Quality means meeting customer requirements. So, let me go back. Where did I go? There it is, meeting customer requirements. So that's important to remember. So quality. And customer requirements can also be called specifications. And that's worth remembering too. But quality is just meeting customer requirements. So for the quality plan, a checklist of requirements, standards to be followed, requirements review and walkthrough schedule, and sign off or approval points for those requirements. Other components of your business analysis plan and what it means. Requirements management plan. Look how long that is. Do you know why? An analyst really is at the heart of what they do in many ways. They are a requirements manager. They manage requirements and the stakeholders who have those requirements. The location of requirements document repository. Repository, by the way, is a word that's used for like company level, senior level, program or portfolio level, higher up. Because a project uses a register, but the company has a broader repository with lots of different project registers and matrices. Other parts of a requirements plan, description of how requirements will be documented, a checklist of requirement standards to be followed, description of how requirements will be prioritized, traceability plans and requirements attributes to be collected, description of how requirements progress will be reported, description of the requirements change management process, list of points where the requirements will be baselined, modeling and diagramming techniques to be used, and sign off or approval points for requirements. For a change policy, description of the requirements change management process, list of points where the requirements will be baselined, and a requirements change request form for people to use, regardless of what group they or department, etc., that stakeholder falls in. One form for all. And document management plan, a location of requirements document repository, a version control system, because look, you don't want people to be updating stuff, documentation on an older, outdated version, and when they submit it, it's non-compliant. You need to control the version of stuff. Make sure everyone can only fill out the current version. I'm talking remove the web page. Don't just take the web page address off, the document that people refer to or whatever. You need to take that whole page off, because some people make their own list and they'll keep the web address. And if they're like, well, where did Sean put that? You know what? I got it in my own list. I'm going to open up that web page. You got to take down the web page as well, or take the document off that web page, the older version, because people will, man, listen. So we can take, like, document version controls is so important. We can take veterans through something called Chapter 31 Voc Rehab, which our company's pre-approved for, which is terrific for veterans, right? I had a guy one time but you can only use one chapter from the VA for education at a time. There are a few different chapters, they call them. Chapter 33 is GI Bill. Chapter 31, vocational rehabilitation, is for veterans with a certain amount of disabilities. So you can only have one or the other. I got a guy calling me up one day who had searched long and hard on the web and found an old version of a document that the VA used to accept for Chapter 31 Voc Rehab. He filled it out. He even signed as the VA certifying official. He signed as the VA certifying counselor official. I mean, like, that's a felony. Now, I don't think he understood it, but he tried to browbeat me into accepting that. He's like, I'm in Chapter 31, so the VA will reimburse you. I want to take that class that starts in a week. I was like, dude, no, you can't do it this way. See, the VA didn't take the old document down. They left it on an antiquated web address, and this guy found it. They didn't have very good version control. And by the way, that document's still out there, and they can still find it if they wanted to. But the guy tried to convince me. He didn't understand how it worked, and I had to explain it to him. But that, I mean, version control, man. Yeah, who knows who else he tried that with? And because they didn't know, they accepted him. VA's not going to repay that company. That guy's not in Chapter 31 anymore. I asked him a couple of questions. I'm like, well, do you currently receive GI Bill benefits? And he said, yes, I'm currently on GI Bill as well. I said, no, you can't be on Voc Rehab Chapter 31 and GI Bill Chapter 33 simultaneously. That cannot happen. When you go from one to the other, they shut the other one down, unless you ever leave the current one and go to a different one. So you got to imagine there's 4 rooms. You can only have the light bulb on in one at a time. And that guy was like, no, that's not true. I said, yeah, no. I was like, sir, I'm a veteran. I used 33 and 31 at different times in my life. It's true. No, it's not. Sir, I mean, people don't want to accept, these things. I was like, well, my acceptance criteria is I can't take that document if I know there's a felony committed on filling it out. What do you mean? Like, do you work at the VA? No, so you're not a certifying official. He was, and I knew it by heart. I was like, it's boxes 10 and 11 on Form 1905, right? Yeah, that's for the counselor. It says counselor fills this out only. Well, I mean, I've been kind of counseling myself. Oh my gosh, this guy was just, version control is hugely important. List of documents required by the PM process is also a part of document management plan. Now we get into eliciting requirements from stakeholders. Choose the appropriate technique of elicitation for requirements. You don't want to badger people more than you have to get their requirements. So think about it, choose the right way to do it, and then do it and get it done. Understanding the business environment or context where the solution will be used is very important. Context counts. Information needed to build test plans and acceptance criteria is also part of stakeholder elicitation. Factors when selecting elicitation techniques. The location of the stakeholders is important. How many of them is important. Complexity of the business and the complexity of the requirements for this. Desired time frame of the sponsor. Do we need to just hurry up and do this, or do I have time to really work on this? Individual stakeholder personalities and preferences. Some people would rather have a one-on-one meeting. They don't like talking with a group around. I mean, you got to work around it. page 145, because whether you collect their requirement or acceptance criteria, I promise you at some point you'll be held to account for it, whether you got it, elicited it or not. Okay? So you need to really put effort into figuring out best way to do it. Top of page 145, it gives us several exam tips, doesn't it? When the exam question asks for techniques that do not require direct involvement of stakeholders, consider these techniques as next to it: observation or job shadowing, document analysis, or research, or competitive analysis. When the exam question asks you for techniques to elicit requirements from key stakeholders, what techniques would be the answer on the exam? Formal interview, requirements workshop. Guys, look at that. It is showing you, you're going to get about 10 to 12 questions about what elicitation technique you should use. This one chart will help you get them all right. This is 5 to 6% of your exam on one page. You need to mark that, get out your tabs and tab that page, because I am telling you, you need to remember this. And we're going to get into numbers of people and stuff like that as we keep going. But this is a very important page. Very important. So I really hope you track this and study it well, because it is exceedingly important. Exceedingly. But all right, I've beat that dead horse enough. And I'm taking a picture of it now, and I'm going to put it on the drive for you so that you'll have it. And I'm going to hurry up and do this so I don't forget. And there it goes. All right, I'll put that on the drive after we're done this evening. That's a great page. Requirements management process. Keep track of your requirements by planning and recording. Developed before you start even gathering requirements. You should have a requirements management process. Remember, analysts are requirements managers. You need to have a plan. Capture requirements as soon as you discover them. It includes the following decisions areas of requirements. Requirements repository. Repository is a senior level alveary where you can go and access lots of requirements, methods, and tools from lots of different projects. Get templates. It's template rich. Number two, it's a knowledge base for requirements. Number two, requirements models and presentation formats. Number three, requirements types. What types are needed? Number four, requirements attributes to be captured. 5, requirements states or status. 6, requirements prioritization process. Quick question. What do you use to prioritize requirements? Moscow. Must have, should have, could have, would like. Number 7, problem tracking / conflict resolution. Number 8, define strategy for traceability. Number 9, reviewing and getting approval of requirements. And 10, requirements baselining. A baseline becomes a baseline after it has been what? Approved by senior people, sponsor, senior manager, PM, even technical architect might even need to see it. It just depends. Important stakeholders. So let's look at the requirements management process by requirements types. Stakeholder requirements vis-a-vis a request. Business requirements should be stated. Solution requirements, 3 separate areas: functional, non-functional, quality requirements. Quality is acceptance criteria. Functional requirements is what you see on a web page, for example. What you see is functional. The HTML formatting behind it is the non-functional requirement, the abilities. If you play a video game, playing it, you're seeing functional stuff. The code that allows it to do that functional stuff are non-functional. Non-functional, again, it's requirements that are behind the curtain that the customer never sees but affects everything the customer uses. And again, quality requirements is acceptance criteria. Don't forget transition requirements. How will we deliver the solution? How will we deliver the product? Shared with the PM. Project requirements, how will we build the solution? That's the project manager's thing. Project scope is to the PM what project requirements are to the PM. We care about product or solution. They care about project. Another tip on page 149. Got to do a couple pages here. And on page 149, the exam tip says, expect to see a situational question about conflicting stakeholder priorities, in which case you use waterboarding. No, I'm kidding, don't do that. How would you handle a situation where one stakeholder wants requirement A, another demands requirement B? Correct answers include, first, facilitating a discussion about the business value of each. That is the most popular answer. You facilitate a discussion with both people at the same time. When you have conflicting requirements from multiple stakeholders, hold a meeting. You facilitate a discussion. You don't have them meet privately. You call them all to a meeting, the ones who have conflicting requirements, and you facilitate the meeting. Guys, the analyst is the meeting facilitator. You need to remember that. That's important. Another correct way to deal with it would be determining the estimated cost to satisfy each. How can I meet each of them, respectively? Another method, comparing the cost to the expected benefits. Weigh them out. Finally, find out if one requirement is dependent on the other. Having a predefined prioritization process helps to resolve conflicts in a consistent way. You may see more than one, quote, correct answer choice for any exam question. Be sure to choose the best. What did I say the best is? Call a meeting that you facilitate with only the stakeholders who have conflicting requirements to discuss the business value of each. And, oh, got a question over here. Let me see. So I have a question asked that says, what does consensus look like between requirements that are in conflict? What consensus will, are you talking, you mean real world, or are you just talking exam? I'm sorry, I just want to clarify it. Because if it's on the exam, it'll just ask for how do you do it? And that would be by having a meeting with them. The way a question will look is it will basically just say, you've been having two issues, or you've been having issues with two stakeholders about conflicting requirements. And now that you've learned about the conflicting requirements, what would be the best way to move forward? And that's really all it's going to be. Yeah, both are important. So in the real world, you know, back to that statement, leaders don't seek consensus, leaders build consensus. In the real world, try to have a solution that you know both parties will accept. Okay, so real world, I'll take that a step further. Remember when I talked about stakeholder influence? See what is most important to them. You know, we judge ourselves by our intentions, we judge others by their actions. What I care about is the motivator. Find out what the motivator is. Sometimes fear is why people want a requirement. Like, look, I just want to be updated, okay? And then when you push it, you find out, and they'll just burst out. I heard this one time where it was like, I'm tired of being kept out of the loop, okay? I want to know when that is done. Because it hit me from nowhere when the client said it to me in a meeting, and I told them they were wrong. They showed me the email, and I looked stupid. I don't want to look stupid again, okay? And it's like, oh, what meeting are you talking about? When did you meet with the client? But yeah, and it's like, okay. So, I mean, in that case, the person just didn't want to look foolish again because they're sitting there with the client and there's, I don't know why that guy was with the client, by the way, but I digress. But find out the motivator. And if you have to use another person to get that information for you, so be it. And when I'm going to work with folks, you know, I'll just bring something up like, well, we all have our pet peeves. And like me personally, I can't stand it when technology doesn't do what I expect it to do. Or try to use software and it freezes, it's not functioning properly, it shuts down constantly. Like, what is going on? Like, that's one of my peeves, is technology not doing its purpose. That really just gnaws at me. Um, by saying something simple like that, and making it sort of a fun discussion, like, can anybody beat that one? You know, you uh, you're at home, technology's not working, and you call your computer a bad name, and the dog starts shaking. You know, like can anybody top that one? You know, like a game. I use, but I'll smile and wink when I say it. And I'll go, okay, the dog wasn't shaking, I was, but I turn it around on myself, and it makes people relax, and they'll loosen their lips a lot more. They'll be like, no, what bothers me is just such and such. And I'll be like, hey, let's do a round table. Larry, what bothers you? And, you know, and one way to make people feel like they're a part of the discussion, ask a question you know they can answer, and then say, come on, Larry, what do you think? But something that you might have mentioned to them or you know they know the answer. And so when they say the answer, you walk over, give them a high five. That's a setup. I already knew Larry knew the answer, but I'm trying to make him feel included as a facilitator. So I ask him something that I know he knows, and he'll say it, and I'm like, that's what I'm talking about. You see the lack of hesitation? I don't know what the rest of you were doing, but Larry's all over it like a fat rat. Isn't that right, Larry? High five. You know, Larry's just smiling, shaking his head, you know. And I'm an introvert, and I'll behave that way to an extent, you know, in a professional setting, just to make everybody feel like, you know, yeah, okay, let's not take ourselves too seriously, and let's be a little more open. So just finding out what matters, what the motivator is. That's the best way to do it, in my experience. It's a good question. Backlog management. So backlog, yeah, we talked about backlogs. This is agile stuff. We finally get to Moscow, don't we? Backlog management, techniques to show solution scope, weighted criteria management, decision ranking system. Moscow is used to prioritize requirements, must have, should have, could have, would like, or like we say, won't get, whatever. Problem tracking steps. Identify the problem. Report the problem tracking system. Assess the problem to find the root cause. We don't want to treat symptoms, we want to find root causes. Rank the problem priority/severity. Determine the cost and time to solve it. Retest after the correction's made. Close the problem in the tracking system. So problems have a tracking system. And update lessons learned to help minimize future project errors. So all important aspects of requirements management tools. So look at the weighted ranking table at the top of page 151. So when we turn to 151, we see weighted criteria ranking. Folks, listen to me. You're going to get 5 to 6 questions on this on the exam. 5 to 6. You need to mark this page and remember it. Very important. You see how it has an ID number, a requirements or features, and it says improve, cost to develop, level of ongoing maintenance anticipated, total score. It's basically a multi-criteria decision matrix to an extent. It's weighted criteria and ranking. So when you have tough choices, use a weighted criteria or ranking system to help the team decide how to evaluate the product or solution options or to prioritize requirements. You got to ask, what criteria are the most important to the stakeholders? How does each option meet that criteria? Each item is compared to the desired criteria, and the options are ranked numerically. The option with the highest ranking is usually chosen. The criteria must be defined before assessing items to make sure the criteria do not become biased. So you need to understand how these tables work, what to use them for. It's to make a tough choice. Everyone is weighting, not weighing, weighting, W-E-I-G-H-T-I-N-G, weighting the criteria. Weighing means it already has a weight. Weighting means you're assigning weight. And what would you suggest as the analyst based on that? So they're going to give you tables, and they're going to ask you, what would you recommend? Generally, the one with the highest weight is the one you go with. So, but read it carefully, because it could say you have this much time left to do some of the work. You want to achieve as many as possible. Though, so then you rate them in order. So let's say you have 6 months left and you want to knock out as many of these requirements as possible. And you reprioritize them as it shows you on the exam example. And then the most important one will take 1 month. The second most important one will take 2 months. The third most important one will take 3 months. What would you recommend? If you have 6 months left and the top 3 add up to 6 months, do the top 3. You see what I'm saying? So if it gives you 6 months of time and it'll say, and you reorganize it and then you say what you can get done, that's how you answer it. It really is that simple. And yeah, the stakeholder will tell you what the weight of it should be. Usually it'll be a group exercise if there's several people that are talking about it. I want you to imagine for weighted ranking that you did a survey or a questionnaire and people answered 1 to 10. And you put the averages down. In this case, they do it by requirement, allow the patient to review their own lab results, improve the customer experience, etc. You can just average out people's results. So requirements management tools continued. Traceability. Oh, it's so big. Wait till next time. Refers to a set of activities and documentation that supports the tracking and completion of requirements for the solution. Traceability matrix used to trace requirements, as we've seen, and change control process, deciding how you will handle those inevitable changes to requirements. And we see similar terms here: traceability, allocation, linking or linkage, relationship, association, lineage, how something's derived, derivation, scope creep, impact analysis, baselining, change control, change management, etc. Change control process, deciding how you will handle inevitable changes to requirements. You need to remember these synonyms for change. Change control, change management, baselining is used as planned. Impact analysis could necessitate changes. Scope creep can necessitate changes. Just understanding the similarity. That's why it says similar terms. And change management, we've already discussed this. You compare plan to actual. You plan to make a 4-foot hood, you actually made a 3-foot hood. Compare plan to actual. This is on a more predictive project where there's more planning because there's higher risk. Variance or difference between planned and actual necessitates a change request. It either gets approved or rejected. Regardless of which one it is, approved or rejected, you're assessing impact. And whether a change request is requested or not, or someone just scope creeped it, they added it without permission, what do? You still have to assess the impact. Whether it was approved or not, if it's already been done or not, even if it was already done, you still have to assess impact. When it comes to changes, one that's requested, you assess for impact. One that was done with no one's permission, you assess for impact. It's approved or rejected by the PM, and they put that in the change log. Remember, I've said this many times: you verify, then validate. Look at it here for requirements management. Present requirements, verify them, then validate them. Then approve requirements. That's the sponsor. Get them to sign off on it. Once they've approved it, you now have your baseline for your requirements, don't you? Then you can start building the solution. That's on the team. Verify the product. That's the tester. Validate the solution, the product. and then it gets approved by the sponsor. Please take particular note that approval, whether it's of the requirements or of the product, approval rests primarily on the sponsor. So anything on the exam usually that says who must approve such and such, I'm telling you right now, 9 times out of 10, it's the sponsor. Now read it carefully. It might be someone else depending on what they're asking. But when it comes to verifying and validating, the sponsor is the approval authority person. And you notice that whether it's planning before the project or after it begins, did you notice you always verify before you validate? So if you get an example that says you have been putting together requirements, they've just been verified, what should you do next as an analyst? After you verify, you validate. After you validate, you get them approved by the sponsor. You have to remember all these in order, folks. But remembering this will help you hugely. Verifying requirements meet the standards of the organization and ensuring quality solution build. Validating is make sure the solution described by the requirements will bring value to the business. So verify for correctness of procedure, validate for completeness of function. There's an exam tip now on page 160. And on 160, it says at the top, the critical path through a project is the longest path of activities and determines the shortest time it could take to complete the project based on time estimates, dependencies, and resource availability. Which path below is the critical path? As it said, the critical path is the longest total duration path. Could you have a question in regards to critical path? It'll be very rudimentary. And all it will basically say is what I'm about to tell you here, which is what you need to remember here, and let me just duplicate it, is that the critical path is the longest one. It's the longest one that's stated. I mean, that's really it. The longest path out of all of them is the critical path. So when you're trying to figure out which one's a critical path, look at all these paths that exist here on this project. There are 4 paths. Let me show you. You go from start to finish. There's path number 1, which is here. Start, A, B, C, finish equals 10 days. I got that by adding up the durations at the top. 4 days for A, 1 day for B, 5 days for C, 4 plus 1 plus 5 equals 10. All you need to remember is this. The critical path, there's 4 paths here, is the highest one, the highest number. And that's the duration of the project. So if you have 112 days, then 97, 95, 92 for 4 different paths on the project, how long is your project? 112 days. Critical path is the project duration. That's all you need to know for this exam. So the critical path is the longest one. That's it. Okay? So for document management, having a system for keeping track of all business analysis documents before the work starts. Version control, again, is important. You gotta have a plan for that. Document system includes a list of documents created and maintained, acknowledgement of who will have access to them. You do not have to give blanket access to stakeholders, folks. Don't do that. Acknowledgement of any security or confidentiality requirements. Talk to compliance people about that. Description of where documents are stored and how they will be named or identified. And then version control. What do you do with an old version? How do you migrate it to the new one? When do you release a new one? How do people know it's the most recent one, the current version, etc. The PM and BA collaborate here. Typically, the PM has a document management process for the project, and the analyst uses and documents stuff according to that process. When in doubt, ask. So putting it all together, wrapping up what we covered today. Business analysis plan includes your communications plan, requirements prioritization process. Remember, Moscow prioritizes requirements, and requirements management process as well. Business analysis work plan shows how all the business analysis work will get done, including dependencies and time estimates, identify deliverables, identify tasks and activities, determine time, which that can be the same, determine timing and sequence, and estimate the work. You can use the 3-point estimate, which uses pessimistic, optimistic, most likely, and then divide by 3. So meaning you ask an expert, dude, how long is it going to take to do this? Well, worst case, 60 days. Best case, 12 days. Most likely 37 days. Well, add up those 3 numbers and divide by 3. That gives you your 3-point estimate. Worst case scenario or pessimistic, best case or optimistic, most likely or realistic. Add all of them up, divide by 3. That's your average of those three points in time. Talked about quadrant analysis, visual high-level estimates, and planning pokers. When you use cards, you just ask people, give them a score and say, use numbers 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, etc., and tell me how difficult this work will be. Basically, you just ask your experts, how hard is this work? Give them a scale. And these are the 3 different ways of scaling it. A summary: planning requires time to do your research. Planning will be rewarded when the project runs smoothly. Good luck. Try to anticipate as many obstacles as you can, be prepared for them, and be ready to adjust plans as necessary. This is your homework and study plan in your drive. Section 4, which is read chapter 5, which is on analysis part 1, elicitation. So see you next time and be safe.